Hey, what's up, Masters? Welcome to another episode of Path to Mastery. My friends, today we are with Dr. Benjamin Hardy. Sir, what's going on?
Just having an amazing day, man. Just happy to be with you.
Yeah, man, same thing here. I love it. And a little bit about you. You are an author of two books. Your most recent book, which we're going to spend some time on today, is called Personality Isn't Permanent. And I'll tell you, that's a topic I have a lot of passion for. I love, and we haven't even talked about this, but I used to teach a course for Keller Williams University
Oh, nice.
on behavior, and kind of, most people, I guess, kind of confuse behavior with personality, or maybe they are the same. And you can tell me more about that. You probably
They're
know a lot
definitely connected,
more
that's for
about
sure.
that. Yeah, and you also have another book which is called Willpower Doesn't Work, which I love that as well. I know sometimes we can grind on willpower, right?
Quite a grind.
I know you've written articles, a lot of great articles that have been read over 1 million times. You have a newsletter with over 400,000 weekly subscribers. I mean, that's just amazing in itself. And you're a family man, so fill in some more of those gaps, man. Who are you?
Just happy to be with you, man. For quite a long time, I was the top writer in the world on medium.com. While when I was doing my PhD, my wife and I became foster parents of our three oldest kids, and we spent 3 years fighting the foster system to adopt them. We had a lot of miracles, a lot of blessings. We had an amazing attorney who changed the laws in South Carolina at the federal level so that foster parents could have some serious rights, and we adopted our kids. And it was a miracle. So we got our three oldest kids, and then literally a month later, my wife got pregnant with twins. And so in
Wow.
2018, we adopted 3 kids. We had twins, so we technically went from 0 to 5 kids that year, which was crazy. She's now pregnant with our sixth child, which is probably going to be
Congratulations.
our last. We're going to have a
Yeah.
boy in November. And yeah, man, we live here in Orlando, and I just write. I wrote like 6,000 words today, and I'm getting back into writing.
Wow.
I go through phases. Writing books is a lot harder than writing articles, and so over the last few years, I've been really diving into writing books. I've got a book coming out in October with Dan Sullivan called Who Not How,
Good for
and
you.
so yeah, writing's fun, man, and it really creates a lot of opportunities. And aside from that, I've got a simple life. Just go home after a few podcasts with amazing people like you and just focus on my kids.
Yeah. Well, hey, I appreciate that, man. Thanks for spending some time with us. And
More than happy to be with you. It's my honor, my friend. I like your
nothing.
background pictures a lot, by the way.
Oh, thank
I
you,
like
man.
the
Appreciate
pictures
it.
of Brady. You got Tiger and Michael, and then I don't
Yeah.
know. I don't know what that other one is on that other side. It looks like you're a Patriots fan, or what is that picture?
Which
That
one are you
one.
looking at?
That one right there.
Oh,
That
that's
one.
it. That's the Adam Vinatieri. That's the kick, man. The snowball. Remember the big kick where he hit that field goal in the snowstorm? That's the
Nice.
big one. And that actually is Brady's rookie picture right there. It has a certificate on the back of it. I bought that at the Natick Mall, Brady's first year with the Patriots. Just randomly, he was out signing. I mean, that was before he was Tom Brady. You know what I mean? So
Totally. Totally.
that's an awesome picture. So
That's
yeah,
amazing, dude.
thanks for acknowledging that, man.
Of
This is my
course.
new spot here. I put together this, COVID hit and kind of changed everything with office space. So I set up this nice room over my garage, nice office, and yeah, I love it. Now we're figuring out a studio. I'm just dealing with the lighting right now, trying to figure out the lighting.
Your
It's
lighting
not
looks
the big.
great, brother.
Oh, I appreciate that. I put some work into it. So anyway, enough about me though, man. This is this is about you. So personality isn't permanent. Talk to what's the essence of that?
The essence of that book is that a lot of people have been sold some serious lies on what personality is. Most people, if you hear just the narratives in pop culture, or even, a lot of people think that personality is innate. They think that your personality is fixed, it doesn't change, that you are who you are, that you have to find yourself.
Mm.
And you think about personality testing, for example, Myers-Briggs, Enneagram, DISC, all those popular things.
Mm.
When I was going through my PhD in psychology, um, I found out that all of those tests are total hogwash. All of those tests are complete bogus. Any test that categorizes people into a personality type, like for example, if you're an ENTJ or if you're a D on the disc, any test that puts people into those types of categories is on a scientific level, at pretty close to what we would say is like a horoscope. They're just not, they're not real science. Those tests are more superstition than anything. But they give people categories and labels, so if you think you're an introvert, for example, that becomes a part of your identity. And your identity is actually different from your personality. Your identity is how you define and describe yourself. And your identity shapes your behavior, and your behavior over time becomes your personality. So that kind of connects back with what you were saying on behavior change. Consistent behavior reflects personality, but behavior comes usually from a person's identity. And people's identity comes from their view of their future. But here's the challenge, is that most people, they don't believe that their future is going to be any different than their present. Most people, they haven't really spent much time imagining a bigger future. They haven't spent much time imagining their future self. And so they believe that who they are today is who they're always going to be. And so their identity drives pretty low-level behavior.
Interesting.
So this book just breaks down what personality really is and how you can create your ideal future self. There's so much research in this subject now about decision making and things like that, and about how you want to imagine your future self and use that as the basis for what you do today. You can also reframe trauma, change how you view your former self. Memory is also a very flexible thing, and that you can let go of former memories, traumatic things that have stunted your growth, and you can learn how to frame those in a way that is beneficial to you right now and in the future. So this book teaches you not only how to design your future, but how to change your past as well, because the past is actually a meaning. How you view your past is just the meaning you gave to experiences. And you can change the meaning you gave to even terrible experiences. And you can learn to view every experience as, this happened for me, not to me. This is a benefit to me. This is something I can use. And that's when you know you've really learned, is when you view the experience with gratitude rather than frustration.
Interesting. Yeah, I love it. Well, you just gave us a lot. I just took a ton of notes, so that's why
I just had to kind of give you an overview since you haven't seen the book.
Absolutely. Well, listen, so the first thing I want to get into though is the DISC, the assessments I've used. I know the Myers-Briggs. I know the DISC. We use the DISC at our company for a lot of years. We use another one called AVA. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, by corporate
I
consulting.
haven't.
Okay. So
by the way, I'm not against testing. I'm just against various types of testing.
Okay. So what do you mean by that?
Well, psychologists test things all the time. You can't do science without testing things. But if the measure isn't scientific, if it hasn't been validated,
got it. Okay.
You know what I mean? Then it's not actually.
So it's not science-based, is what you're saying.
Yeah, it's just some person's theory that they've built some measure around, and they give you an output, and they tell you the type of person you are.
Sure. However, you do see similarities in the different types of people based on the DISC assessment. Is that accurate?
You can find some stuff, of course. I'm not saying that the DISC isn't measuring something, but what I'm saying is with the DISC, it can create a negative identity if you, like, let's just say you over-identify with any of those. Like, here's the problem with labels in general, is that they're not always true. Let's just say that there's someone who gets a D on the DISC. If you actually followed that person throughout a given day, they would not always be a D, but if they have the label, then they assume that they're always that person. So what research has shown us is that labels lead to mindlessness. They lead you to being mindless of all the times that the label is not actually true. And that can be a negative in a lot of ways, because, for example, if you believe you're depressed, then you'll believe you're always depressed, and you won't notice the times when you were actually feeling happy throughout the day. But people aren't always one type of person. In different situations, in different contexts, you're not going to be the same person. But also, even if a person is a D, according to the DISC, they may assume that they've always been a D and that they're always going to be a D, when if you actually looked at who they were 5 or 10 years ago, they probably were quite different. Maybe they still would have scored, maybe they would have still slanted that way, but you're not going to be the same person. I mean, even if I asked you, do you think you're the exact same person you were 10 years ago? Do you?
I'm pretty close.
You think you're the exact same guy?
I would say I'm pretty close behaviorally. I'm impatient. I'm very direct. I'm to the point. I'm a social person as well, but I think my D is.
So you don't think you've changed much? You don't think you've changed much in the last 10 years?
I've changed. Yes, of course I've changed, but I think behaviorally, I feel like I'm similar. I mean, I changed, I've grown up, I've gotten more mature, I've more educated, right? I have more knowledge than I did, but I think part of me
you still follow the same patterns for the most part?
Yeah.
I'm not trying to drill on you.
Yeah.
Here's my guess. Here's my guess.
Unconsciously.
No. Think about it.
Yeah.
Think about yourself 10 years ago. Would you solve, if you were to go back with the current knowledge and perspectives?
This is good. This is for everybody listening to this, right? This is the conversation.
And I'm not, and what I like is that you're not wrong, but your view is the typical view, which is that if you were to go back and look at yourself 10 years ago and watch yourself solve situations and problems, what you're saying is that the person you are today would do them the exact same way.
No, I have more skills than I did 10 years ago today, as well as more than 10 years ago than I had 20 years ago.
So maybe you'd be better at what you did, but you'd do things the exact same way still. If you were to go back to a situation of yourself 10 years ago and watch yourself problem solving and going through the things you do, you're saying, I have more skill and capacity, so I'd probably do what I was doing better, but I would definitely still, with everything I know and how I am today, I would go about it the exact same way.
No, I wouldn't. But see, I think I'm struggling right now to separate the two. Like when I look at
that's because you're so caught up on the disc. You've spent so much time identifying with that measure that it seems like that's how you define personality. And so you're having a hard time seeing yourself outside that label.
Well, in the disc, and a lot of the people listening to this, real estate agents, that's one of the first things that happens. You get your real estate license, join a company, and they give you a disc. So I'm sure
totally, dude.
This is going to resonate.
Well, you know what's crazy, dude, is when I got my PhD in organizational psychology, you know, I took the disc before I went through a PhD program. I took the Myers-Briggs. I took the color code, which is a terrible personality test. And I believed all of it. You know, I thought that, you know what, but I didn't fully believe all of it, to be honest with you. And no one who actually takes those tests really fully believes it, because we're more multidimensional than a single.
Sure.
You know what I mean? So like so what are the four on the disc? You got the D. What is
DIS? DISC.
What is this? What's the S? Stabilizer?
S is steady. Yeah, exactly. Steady. Stable.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I actually got S, and I think that I was under like the perception on that test that I was like not a leader or something like that. However, it came up. I had some guy take me and my wife through the disc, and you know, she was the D and I was the S. But what's funny is that if you were to take the test again, and I know that you've really identified with D from the sounds of it, and so you'd probably try to score similarly. But but listen,
I can make it come out any way I want. Well, to be honest with you.
Well, of course you can. Of course you can. But if you were to honestly answer versus honestly answer 10 years ago, there's no way you'd get the same score, because the scoring has a lot to do with so many factors. One is the reason you take the test. One's the mindset. One's the situational factors. There's so much research that shows if you took the same test twice, but with different situational factors, you'd actually get different scores. I actually, just to prove the point.
That makes sense.
And I had someone on my team, because in the sales world, it sounds like DISC is really popular. In the entrepreneurial world, a test called the Kolbe is very popular. Have you heard of Kolbe A Index?
I have not.
So that's a super popular test in the entrepreneurial world, because entrepreneurs can use that test to find out if, first off, like how their team takes action. It's actually kind of a cool test, but it leads people to making the same errors, which is putting people into categories and assuming that people are going to be radically consistent to those categories in every situation. But I had someone on my team take the Kolbe like 3 months ago, and she got a certain score. And now my main integrator or my main assistant is leaving, and I need to hire a new one, but I'm thinking I want someone from internal. And so the person who helps me make hiring decisions, she's like, well, what was her Kolbe? And so I showed her the score and I said, yeah, but watch this. I'm going to let her take the Kolbe again. And I promise you, it's not going to be the same. And so I had her take the Kolbe again. And people who believe in the Kolbe believe that you can't change it. Just like probably people who believe in the disc believe you can't change it. If you're a D, you're always a D. But with the Kolbe, the person who helped me, she's like, she's not going to get a different score. She's like, I've done this for years. No one gets different scores. I'm like, I promise you she will get a different score. I know this because I've studied the science of this. And anyways, she took the test again. I didn't tell her why. I'm just like, will you take the Kolbe again? I just want to see something real quick. I'm like, we're trying to make some choices here. Took the Kolbe again. Her score was pretty dang different. I wasn't surprised, but the person who the Kolbe is their gospel, that was surprising to her. She just thought that there was something wrong with how the person took the test.
Well, I mean, it's interesting too, because, even myself, I can be a different person when I'm home with my kids than I'm going to be when I show up at the
You actually
office,
are a
right?
different person in both of those
Yeah.
situations. You can't not be. It would be pretty
Okay.
weird of you to be the same guy in both those situations.
So explain that then. I'm a different person. I'm acting different. I'm being different,
The
but I'm the
role
same
that you're
person.
in is based on the context, right? So the role in when you're at work sounds like you're a leader and you're selling and you're doing so many. But if you were to approach your relationship with your kids that way, first off, your role is different. When you're selling someone stuff from work, the role is that you're a salesperson. But when you go and you're with your kids, the nature of that relationship is fundamentally different. Like you're their father, you're their nurturer, but also you're their friend. And so the relationship between you two is actually what shapes your role and your identity. And so in different roles, you're going to have to be a different person because the role is fundamentally different. That doesn't mean that you're inconsistent or that you're
Mm,
false in either or. It just means that context really matters, and that in certain contexts you are going to be different
sure.
than you are in different contexts. And that's actually one of the things that those types of tests don't account for. They give you a score and they assume that you're always going to be the same guy, which is inaccurate of how people really work. It places content over context when context actually matters a lot more than content.
That makes sense. Well,
But
let me ask you that.
one last thought
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
about this.
Sure.
And if people want to take these tests, go for it. Is all I'm saying is here's the problem. Here's one of the problems with these tests. The whole emphasis is
So
on who you are right now or who you were in the past. And I don't know if you've ever heard of the book by Carol Dweck called Mindset.
I have, yeah,
He
absolutely.
explains the difference between people who have a fixed mindset and people who have a growth mindset. And
Yes.
people with a fixed mindset are very definitive about who they are today. They are very obsessed about who they are today, and they assume that who they are today is who they're always going to be. That is what a fixed mindset is. And so what these tests do is they give people a fixed mindset because they place all the emphasis on who you are today, and then they give you a label. And when you get that label, whether it's D or ENTJ or whatever, you assume that label is first off has always been true, but then you second, and this is where it really gets negative, you assume that your future self is going to also be true of your present label. And so that is why, and so it literally stunts imagination towards your future self. It stops you from imagining a future self that doesn't have that label. It stops you from imagining and pushing outside that label. And so it literally stunts your imagination and your flexibility towards growth. And
Interesting.
then in future situations, you're probably non-flexible towards any situation that's outside your label. Whereas a growth mindset, if you have a growth mindset, you're not that worried about who you are today. You're not that definitive about who you are today because you know that who you are today is temporary and that your future self can and would be different if you chose to make them different.
Hmm. So I love the conversation. I'll be honest, I'm struggling a little bit, to be honest with you, because when people, like, for instance, people come in and, I run real estate teams, and people come in and we have an understanding. Oh, maybe
Use the
it's
disc. Go
based.
ahead, because you know what it does for you? It gives you a language. It gives you something to do. Go for it. But I'll just say, as for myself, I wouldn't want to use it if I came into your
So
organization.
what's the alternative then? What would we, how would we, what's the alternative?
That's awesome. So the alternative for you as a leader, or the alternative for me as an individual who's trying to create an amazing future?
Both.
We'll start with you as a leader. Use measures that actually predict success, because the disc doesn't. If
Okay.
someone's a D or someone's an S, can't they both be successful?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So
100%.
that has nothing to do with success. So use measures that predict success: optimism, emotional intelligence, learning ability, grit. Like actually, or use the big five, which is the personality measure that's actually scientific. Give people the big five. If you find that people are conscientious or extroverted, even probably in your field, you want people to be extroverted, more extroverted.
Yeah.
That
For the
the
most
big
part.
five would never actually say you're an introvert or an extrovert, because no one is actually one or the other. We just slant one way or another, and in different situations will be more one way or another. So use, if you're going to use measures, which I recommend you do, use measures that have been scientifically proven to predict performance. Just as one example,
So how do you
optimism.
get the measures? Like, how do you
You can
determine
find them. You
somebody's
can
optimism?
actually just download them, and you can build your own battery. Like you can build your own survey with all sorts of amazing questions to measure people's actual personality, which would be the big five. And the major ones that really matter there for performance, one is conscientiousness. The more conscientious someone is, the more goal oriented, the more motivated they are. The thing about that is you wouldn't assume that whatever their score is today is going to be their score in 6 months. Maybe in your organization, because you're such an amazing leader and because of the experiences that they have, the people, when they come in, they better be transformed because of your environment, because of the experiences, and because of the motivation, and because of the success that they're going to have. And so you'd maybe want to measure them again in 6 months,
Yeah.
Optimism, there's a lot of research specifically about salespeople. And, so they've studied people for like 3 years, people who are doing phone calls, like sales calls, who are just
That's what I
facing
do. Yeah.
rejection after rejection after rejection. And people who scale high on optimism, they can handle the difficulties. They sell more, and they stay longer, which is obviously really important for sales jobs. And so the challenge, and honestly, to be fully honest with you, personality testing is like literally one part of one chapter of my book. This whole book is literally about actually creating your desired future self. This book's not really for leaders, but it's really important, I guess, since this is the conversation and you are a leader and you run groups. I say if you want to stick with DISC because it gives you a language, go for it. But if you really want to get good at measuring performance, use tests that predict performance.
Fair enough. Maybe it's Benjamin. Maybe it's one tool that we use when we first hire somebody that gives us a little bit of a context.
Use it, use it.
But I get what you're saying. 100%.
I say use it if you want. As a psychologist, I'm just giving you my honest opinion.
You're the expert, and that's why I had you on. So you're really making me rethink everything. and listen, and here's the thing. You're right. I've seen people in the past be frustrated by being put in a box because a DISC or an AVA or another assessment said, well, you're this. And then all of a sudden they're crushed. Like, well, hold on. You're telling me I'm not a fit for what I'm doing. And next thing you know, you've actually harmed somebody. I've seen that happen as well with some of these assessments.
People lose jobs. I laugh because my wife almost didn't marry me because of a score that I got on a personality test. It was the color code, which honestly, when I look back on it now that I've like literally reviewed the questions, I took it back when I was an undergrad, but like when I look back on it now, I'm like, holy cow, the design of this test is bogus. But because her family really took seriously the color code, and we all have, I guess, our test of choice, our little, but her family loved this personality test. And when they found out that I was a white, which means that I spend a lot of time thinking and imagining. And also, whites are really passive and they don't set goals and they're not committed. Like when they found out that I was a white, they're like, this guy, she can't marry this guy, even if he's a great dude, even if he's overcome huge obstacles, even if he's like a freaking killing it in college and he's got big goals. Like we know he's a white, so we know he's not going to stick to any of that. Like we're like, whites are passive, they're aloof, so like they were very encouraging my wife not to marry her because of my score on that test. What's hilarious is if I took that test, just like you said with the DISC, I could get anything I wanted.
So a few other things that I wrote down is you said your identity comes from the view of the future. Explain that.
It's big, man. It's huge. This is counterintuitive because we generally think that our identity comes from the past. And actually the past heavily impacts our view of the future. But our view of the future impacts how we see ourselves. So for example, a lot of people in COVID-19, the sad part is that their view of the future has actually gotten worse. People are getting more, as masses. And if you listen to mainstream media, it's literally designed to kill your hope. But if your view of the future is bleak, then you're not going to have much confidence in yourself. You're not going to actually. And so like, I'll give a little story because this story kind of really helps. So like I have a friend named Andre. Andre grew up in the hood of Boston, actually. and you're speaking to me from Boston, right?
Right? Outside of Boston. Yeah.
That's pretty awesome. That's pretty awesome. I have to say.
And I grew up in the projects.
Well, dude, I have to say
New York. South Bronx, New York.
I love where you're coming from. So you would like Andre, and honestly, Andre's part of Genius Network, and I think you and him would have an amazing conversation.
Awesome. Well,
Andre, by the way, is chapter 2 of my book, which is called The Truth of Personality. But here's just very brief on Andre's story. So Andre grew up in the hood of Boston. He grew up, in kind of a criminal environment. And basically, most of his teachers in elementary school had kind of wrote him off. There's probably some systematic racism and whatnot, but they wrote Andre off because just of his background and stuff. But he had one teacher, Miss Ellis, his 6th grade teacher, who actually talked to him like a human being, who defended him against his teachers. She was his band teacher. And so ultimately, she treated him with respect, and she helped him get interested in band. And so he actually showed up for her class and really, he didn't really care much about his other classes, but he liked Miss Ellis because she liked him. Well, she got him interested in the trumpet, and the trumpet became kind of a part of his identity. For 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, he was in Miss Ellis's class, and he really started to love the trumpet. It became kind of a part of his future. It became a part of his purpose. He identified with it, and he saw potential there. And he thought that maybe that's what he would do in the future, is play the trumpet. Well, when he got to junior high school, his friends, who were pretty thuggish, he had new friends in junior high because he went to a different school. They told him he couldn't carry that black box with him, his trumpet box. They said, you can't really carry that around with you anymore because it makes us look stupid. And so you have to choose. Either you throw away the trumpet or you can't hang out with us anymore. That's what his friends said when he was 14 years old. Well, Andre threw away his trumpet. And as he told me, he said, when I threw away my trumpet, I threw away my purpose. And he said, when I threw away that, I had no reason to go to school. So I dropped out of school. And because I no longer saw myself as a trumpet player, that was no longer a part of who I am. That was no longer a part of his future. And if that was no longer a part of his future, then everything that went with that future was gone. And so his identity shifted. And now his goal began to be to really fit in with his friends. And so that became his goal. The thing about it is that all behavior is shaped by outcomes, even if you're not really thinking about what those outcomes are. So if you go to the bathroom, that's a behavior shaped by an outcome. You need to get, if you're going to the grocery store, that's a behavior shaped by an outcome. Every behavior we do is shaped by outcomes. In philosophy, we call that teleology. And so with Andre, his focus shifted, and he wasn't conscious of that process. He didn't say, okay, my goal now that's shaping my identity is to fit in with my friends. But that's what happened. His goal shifted. Rather than focusing on trumpet and stuff, he was now full on board with fitting in with his friends, which by 18 landed him in prison. And then when he got into prison, his goal became to be the number one guy in the hierarchy in prison. And so his goal shaped his identity, which was how he saw himself, and his identity shaped his behavior and his actions. Everything he was doing was focused on what he wanted. Just like you've got a goal of doing stuff with your podcast and your teams. And so that's how you see yourself, and how you see yourself is shaping how you act. If you shifted your goal, you'd probably change to some degree how you explain yourself. And your identity is different from your personality. Your identity is how you see and explain yourself, but your identity shapes your actions. And so you've got to be really thoughtful about the future that you're actually striving for, because your future, whatever it is that you see in the future, is the thing driving you. And a lot of people, their future isn't much different than their present. They haven't thought too much about it, or their future is worse than their present, if they consume a lot of mainstream media. But whatever future you commit to, that's the thing that starts shaping your actions and behaviors. It's really amazing. And it's called perspection in psychology, but that's where it's all going. It empowers us to say, I get to choose my future, and that's where my identity goes.
I'm guessing most people, their future is determined by their past in their mind. Is that true?
Yes.
Or it's not? It's in reality, it's not. But they are living their past. Pretty much.
Well, I will say this. One of the things that you would need to shift. So I literally break this down in the book, but there's 4 what I call levers of personality. One is trauma. You've got to reframe your trauma. You have to literally change the meaning of the past, because you're 100% right. The meaning we give to former experiences shapes our identity, because it shapes what we see as possible for us. So trauma, by the way, isn't always just big things. Trauma isn't always getting hit by a car or being sexually abused. Trauma could be as small as having someone say you're not good at math when you're a little kid, and you believe it, and you're like, okay, so that stops being a part of your future, right? You stop even considering that as an option. You know what I mean? If you're, and so you have events that you gave meaning to, that you held weight to, that you then identified with. And so then those things shape what you think is possible for you. And so you stop imagining a future of being in a happy relationship because you got divorced or whatever it is. Like you have events that you gave meaning to, which change your view of the future. Maybe they completely limit that. What they say is that trauma shatters imagination and it shatters flexibility and hope. And so if you obviously don't have hope or imagination in some certain area of your life, then you have no future in that area of your life. And so as a result, there's no change happening there. So yeah, the past can impact our view of the future, and we have to be very wary of the meaning we give to the past. One thing that's really amazing about memory, though, so think about it from this perspective. Culture is essentially the personality of a group. And, so we're seeing a culture shift in America right now, right? Especially with like Black Lives Matter and all that stuff, right?
Sure.
Like we're seeing a culture shift where we're now looking at the past with different eyes, right? And we're giving different meanings to former things, whether it be people in history or just how things were done, right? For good and bad. A lot of people are now looking at Colin Kaepernick as a hero, whereas maybe like 3 years ago, they were like, dude, why are you not giving the flag the respect, right? So we're looking at the same content from a different context, and therefore we're giving it different meaning, right?
Yes.
And so that's true on a historical and a societal level. It's also true on a personal level. Memory is not fixed, it's fluid. Memory is based on the meaning you give to things. And you can very much go back to experiences. Like I'll give myself as an example. When I grew up, my dad was a drug addict, and so the meaning that I gave to that was that my dad was the cause of all my problems, and that, that he was a bad dude. Well, now that I'm a lot older, and also my dad's no longer a drug addict, he's totally turned himself around. Also, I now know a lot more about trauma and also about addiction. And my dad was adopted, and I've now adopted 3 kids. I have some more context, and I can look back on the past and have action. And also, one of the things about understanding context more, I asked my dad a lot of questions. I said, Dad, will you enlighten me on like what actually happened? What led you to those experiences and those decisions? And he told me a lot of things that the younger version of me had no clue about, no context of. And so he's told, I learned a lot of things about my dad, and I now have a lot of understanding and compassion and empathy towards the decisions he made. And so I can give a different meaning to my past experiences than maybe the person who was 12 years old could give that meaning. I now look at it and I'm like, I don't view it as all that stuff was negative stuff that happened to me. I actually say that stuff was all benefits that happened for me, because had I not gone through all that stuff, I wouldn't have had the experiences that have empowered me to learn a lot of fast lessons. And so I believe that I'm grateful for that past, but I was not grateful for it while it was happening, but I now can give different meanings to the past. And so that's how you reframe trauma, is you give it different more meanings.
So you made a choice. You make a choice to do that.
You have to make a choice how you frame your own past. Your past is your responsibility.
And how do people listening to this right now, what are some strategies or some tips or how can somebody do that? Somebody that's maybe.
Well, one step is just to think about the past that you currently have framed. And you have to just, this can be difficult for people, admittedly. A first step is to realize that your view of the past is not objective. It's not fact. It's actually perspective. You have a perspective based on whatever emotions you experienced. And I'm guessing that some of the experiences you've had in the past were terrible emotionally. You had a negative emotional experience, and you developed meaning through your emotions. That's how trauma is formed, is you have a negative emotional experience, and then the meaning you give to the experience is based on the emotions you felt, which initially sucked. But rather than stepping away and saying, what can I, and so I guess, second step is in first acknowledging that your view of the past is not objective, but it's your perspective, is basically asking yourself, what are all the benefits that you've gotten from this experience? What are all the good things that maybe either did come or could come from this experience if you looked at it a different way? Another thing you could do, so looking at all the gains, that's a great one. Another one is if you're having a hard time seeing it from a positive perspective, right? Like whatever happened, could have been your dad was a drunk, could have been that you got hit by a car and lost your legs, whatever happened that maybe you're the victim to. So there's 2 ways of looking at an event. Either it happened for you or it happened to you. If it happened to you, what that means is that it's still negatively impacting you. And as a result, there's nothing you can do about it. If it happened for you, then you can take everything that it gave you and you can use it to create a better future. And so you kind of have to just choose. Are you still seeing this thing? So one easy way of looking at it is, what are all the things from your past that you're still saying that was something that happened to me and I'm still mad about it, or or it's limited me, it's stopped me in some way, and my present is worse because that thing happened.
Yeah.
Any area of your past where you can say that, that's what needs reframing. And the way to reframe it, aside from proactively choosing a better narrative, which is looking for the benefits and then defining the benefits, maybe you need to get more information, like I did with my dad. I had to ask him a lot of questions, understand his perspective more.
Yeah.
Maybe you need to expand your horizon and your perspective, get some more context so that you can actually, and that might not just be getting information from those around you, but maybe it may be educating yourself. But ultimately, if you start educating yourself and getting more information, then of course the past is happening for you because it's leading to learning. And if you can take that learning from your past and use it to translate to a better future, then you've learned from it. And if you've learned from your past, that means you don't have to repeat it. But if you view it as this still happened to me, what that means is you haven't yet learned from it. You're still just mad at it. You've shut yourself off.
I mean, I'm curious. You mentioned Andre. I'm going to go back to that for a second.
I would love you to interview him, by the way. He would be your probably best interview. He is amazing. By the way, just to finish his story, just as a quick second.
Same upbringing, dude. Like,
well, we'll just listen to this.
Describe, yeah.
Well, so he almost made it. He almost made it to his goal of being the number one guy in prison. He was in solitary confinement and he was getting ready to kill a few guys in his solitary confinement unit. And it hit him square in the face for the first time, the ultimate impact of his goals. He finally realized, he calls it his Wizard of Oz moment, because he was getting ready to go kill some people and it hit him. What is the ultimate end of what I'm pursuing? He said, if I become number one guy in this prison, what does that actually mean? It means that I'm some top dude here in a cell in the middle of nowhere, Massachusetts. And so he finally questioned the true validity of his goal and how that was impacting him and his future. And so he questioned it. He calls it the Wizard of Oz moment, which he believes God gave him, because he said, at the end of the Wizard of Oz, what's there? It's all smoke and mirrors. It's just false. It's nothing real. And so he went back to his cell and he thought to himself, if I'm not going to be the king of nowhere, because this is obviously nowhere, what should I do? He had to rethink his future, which then would reshape his identity and his behavior and eventually his personality. What he ultimately decided, he said, I want to get out of prison, but then he thought that's not a good enough goal because 75% of people who get out of prison come straight back. And so he said, I want to be successful. How do people become successful? Well, they go to college. That was his thought process. This might not be everyone else's thought process, but this was his thought process 20 years ago. Anyways, he said, well, if successful people go to college, then I'm going to go to college. And here's the funny part. The only college he had ever heard of was Harvard, because that's just how much exposure he had, and you can only set goals that you've been exposed to. So that was his goal. He decided that Harvard would be his new trumpet. Harvard would be his new purpose. And so with that goal, it took him 8 years, but he taught himself how to read, do law. He got himself counseling. He had mentors. He started avoiding all of the losers in prison, and he beamed himself on a straight path. And it took him 8 years to get out. And then it took him 15 years, but then he became a fellow at Harvard and he started teaching in an office there. So he actually achieved his vision because he set a specific target that was worthy of him to build his identity around. And so our future and the things we're chasing are the things shaping our identity, which shapes our behavior and our personality.
Oh,
so go ahead and go back to whatever you want with Andre, but I just felt like I should finish the story.
No, I appreciate it. That's a great story. I definitely want to connect with Andre, and it sounds like you'd be I might be talking to myself, to be honest with you. The trumpet, though, I mean, that was kind of a moment where, how did he figure that? Like, how did he get back to that? He
looks back. That's retrospect. He actually, in retrospect, he said that quitting the trumpet is the turning point that led him to
for all the people listening to this right now, how do you go back? Like, I kind of have some ideas of my moment, but how do people go back? Is it just writing? Is it journaling? Is it
journaling's big, but maybe having conversation with people. Think about it. We make meaning all the time. We actually change our mind on things all the time. Like, for example, I could change my mind on the idea that I don't like lifting weights and that I prefer running instead. I could have a conversation and I could, so like we change our mind about things all the time and we shift the meaning that we gave to, but this is about doing it actively. So like what Andre did when he was thinking about his past is he realized quitting Trumpet was pivotal. Like, he didn't realize it in the moment, but now the meaning he gives to that, and he could give a totally different meaning, but again, we shape our narrative. We shape the meaning. So his narrative that he uses to explain his past is that quitting the Trumpet became the thing that led him to quitting everything else in his life. Because quitting leads, he says that bad people don't go to prison, quitters do. And he said quitting his Trumpet led him to quitting on everything else and eventually led him into prison. And so he needed a new trumpet, which ultimately became Harvard. And now he has whatever trumpet he's pursuing right now. He has goals right now that he's pursuing. And so that's his new trumpet / Harvard. Whatever your goal is that's your trumpet.
He's in the Genius Network?
Yeah. He does a lot of cool stuff about addiction recovery and stuff. He works with prison inmates, and he helps them a lot throughout the US.
Yeah. So most of my listeners know I'm November 7th, 18 years sobriety for me. That's another reason I reached out to Joe and these guys. I wanted to get involved in Genius Recovery. So our plan to get involved.
He could use some serious help in Genius Recovery.
Yeah. So I'm excited about all this stuff. So final point I want to touch on before we wrap. This has been fantastic too, by the way. Future self, man. What are some, give our listeners some how do we create a future self for ourselves?
Future self is so important. First step is take some time to sit and imagine who you see your future self as. It could be any specific amount of time. It could be 1 year into the future. It could be 3, 5, 10 years into the future. Who is that person? A crucial thing that you need to do if you want to make conscious decisions is just like you would view your former self as, at least to some degree, a different person, and that you would do things differently than them, and that you see things differently, and that you're in a different situation. What most people do, and there's a nice TED talk on this, so I'll send people to that. It's called The Psychology of Your Future Self. It's 6 minutes long. It's by a Harvard psychologist who's been studying this for a long time. But here's what he's found. He's found that most people, he actually has a brilliant quote on this. He says that human beings are works in progress that mistakenly think they're finished. So we're works in progress that think we're finished. And so what we do is
that makes a lot of sense. Most
people think that who they are is the finished product.
Yeah.
And so they think that who they are today is who they're always going to be. And so most people, they imagine a future self that's basically the same person they are today. And what they're not really doing is they're not spending much time imagining anything at all. They're just remembering the past, which is exactly what you said. And so first thing you want to do is actually acknowledge that your future self is a different person, and that likely they'll be very different from even how you predict. What his research has shown is that people underpredict how much their future self will be different because they assume that their future self is going to be the same. So first off, acknowledge that your future self is a different person. They're going to have different experiences, different knowledge, different goals, potentially different values. They're going to be in a different place focused on different things. And hopefully between now and then, you've gone through some serious experience so that your future self's in a better place. They can make better decisions. They're more adaptive, more resilient. They're just a better person, frankly. Not that you're not a great person now, but you want to think, who is that person? What is their situation? What's their focus? And once you've actually taken the time to clarify your future self. So like as an example, me, when I was back in 2015, when I first started writing online, it was during the first year of my PhD program. My view of my future self was that I was a professional author, that I was making at least 6 figures so I could provide for my family, that I was spending most of my time researching, but I was also collaborating with people like Dan Sullivan. And so you want to think about who's your future self, but then in order for it to go to the next level, you have to actually turn into a tangible outcome or result. So like the future self is kind of a broad identity that then can become the basis of your new identity. But you need to turn it into a tangible outcome because your brain needs goals. Your brain needs an outcome because you can't reverse engineer a broad concept. You can only reverse engineer an outcome. And so you want to think, what's one goal? What's one outcome that if it were true, you could have what you wanted? In my case, it was get a 6-figure book deal. If I could get a 6-figure book deal from one of the major publishers, then I would be my future self. And so that's an outcome. You need to turn your future self into one measurable result that you can then focus on and actually accomplish. Another thing you need to do is actually tell people who your future self is. That takes courage because you're not there yet. And a lot of people would throw that in the category of faking it till you make it. But if it's what you really want, and if it's what you're really striving for, then you're not faking anything. You're just trying to become who you want to be. And maybe you're not there yet. Just because you're failing or improving doesn't mean you're faking anything. You're being very actually genuine and honest, maybe for the first time ever. Given that Alcoholics Anonymous, there's that whole concept that you're as sick as your secrets. That's true of trauma. but that's also true of your future self. You need to be honest about who you really want to be, so that then you can start renegotiating your environment and your relationships so that you can start becoming your future self. Aside from telling people about your goals and about who you really want to be and seeking help, invest in that future self. Invest money in any form or fashion. If you're wanting to be a podcaster, buy a microphone, buy a course on how to interview well. Like, do some form of investment where you're putting your money towards your future self. You're investing literally your money. That will solidify your identity. And then just remove aspects from your environment that keep you stuck. And maybe journal about your future self in the morning before you look at social media, so that you can put yourself into a proactive frame of mind, so that you're acting consciously rather than acting unconsciously and reactive to your environment. Those are some ways that you could become your future self.
Awesome, man. Really good stuff. So how do our listeners, if they're looking for your book, or how do they get in touch with you for any other products you
Personality
have?
isn't permanent anywhere. The book's on Audible. The audiobook's not by me. It's by someone who's a freaking amazing professional audiobook person. You can get the Kindle, get the hardcover, but get this book. It will blow you away, because it kind of demystifies what personality is and kind of pulls all the layers off that society has placed upon it. Most of those layers limit your agency. They limit your ability to imagine and create a future self. Most of the views of personality really stunt people's growth and imagination and flexibility as a person. And so my goal for this book was to remove all those to the extent I could, so that people could be flexible and adaptive and ultimately choose the person they want to be versus be stuck as the person they've been. My website's benjaminhardy.com. You can get a free future self checklist by just opting in. You'll also get access to my newsletter, which I send out multiple times a week. And so benjaminhardy.com. And ultimately, the invitation is check out Personality is Permanent, because it's going to rock your world.
I love it, man. I'm going to go get signed up for your website right away.
Yeah, just stick in your email. You'll actually get it. There's a 23-minute training where I break down trauma, future self. I break down labels, and then I offer people into my 30-day future self program, actually.
Awesome. And I know you're actually doing part of the training as well for the Genius experience, right? I think they sent.
I think I'm probably in there. Yeah. I think I've done some blogging. I've spoken at Genius Network before a lot of times. I've probably spoken at Genius Network 10 times, but I've done a full day training at Genius Network where I broke down my blogging strategies, because my blogs have been read over 100 million times. And so they just asked me to just break it down. I think though that since you're in the Genius experience, I think you probably got that full 6-hour training.
I started 2 days ago. Literally,
dude, you're
2 days ago.
And I will recommend Joe do your podcast, and I'll recommend Andre do your podcast, bro.
Oh, I appreciate that.
And if you want to help Joe with Genius Recovery, I mean, obviously that's a
dude. That's
a nonprofit.
As soon as I heard that,
but that's what he wants help with. Those are the people who will help Joe in that area. Really matter.
Yeah, man. I used to go out and talk to the kids locally at the schools in the underprivileged areas. I got nothing more than that. That was the highlight. I mean, that was one of the highlights of what I did. You know what I mean? And I just got away from it, just going in and talking to the kids and saying, just because I think you and Joe
could be good friends.
All right. Well, I appreciate that. And I look forward to that. So everybody listening to this, it was great. I appreciate your time. I haven't done an hour interview in ages, man. So this was cool. What would you say for anybody listening to this? Let's say they take no other action except you want them to take one action right now. Like, what do you want them to walk away with?
I would say, the number one regret that people have on their deathbed is that they didn't have the courage to be the person that they really wanted to be. Instead, they lived up to the expectations of those around them. That's kind of, that's been found to be one of the top regrets. So rather than being consistent with your former self, which is the easy way to go, be consistent with your true future self, the person you really want to be. Organize your life so that your behavior and your life and your results start to be consistent with the person you want to be. And you can do that. You can start living your life and start making decisions so that it's all being driven by your future rather than kind of dragged by your past. I guess my last insight is this. Your goals should be what determines your personality. Your personality is not the thing that should determine your goals. And most people view it the opposite way. Most people, they say, well, who am I? And I'm going to set goals that fit me.
Well, that's the disc, right? That's the disc.
That's the general view of personality. Yeah. But if your goal, which is your future self, becomes the determining factor for what you do, then your personality becomes based on your goal, because you set a goal, which then, allows you to have a clear identity and purpose. Your identity is how you see yourself, and it's what you identify with. And then your identity shapes your behavior, which over time transforms you into a new person. So your purpose drives your personality rather than your past driving your personality. And so when your personality is shaped by your goals, then you transform a lot as a person. You have peak experiences. You're going outside your comfort zone. And by the way, most people view your personality and your comfort zone are essentially the same thing. So for a D, sticking in the way of doing things is how they do things. It's being consistent. Going outside your comfort zone and learning new skills is difficult. It requires uncertainty, and it then allows for peak experiences and learning and increased flexibility and adaptability as a person. So I guess just the invitation is, let your goals shape your personality. Don't let your current personality limit your goals.
All right. Great advice, my friend. Well, listen, for everybody listening, go get yourself a copy of Benjamin's book on, you said Audible. It's on Audible.
Of course.
Love Audible, or if you want to get a hard copy, right?
Yeah, there's about 150 journal prompts in here. You can get them in the Audible. You'll find there's extreme amount of questions in this book for journal prompts. So the hardcover is pretty sweet, but if you're an Audible person, which I am as well, I understand.
Yeah, I love Audible.
Audible's
All right,
amazing.
man. Well, hey,
it's a pleasure, man. I'll give my good word to Joe and Andre for sure.
I appreciate you, my friend. Thank you for your time.
See you, brother.